As a family court judge, I'm very interested in exploring new and innovative ways for parents in conflict to resolve their disputes in a positive and healing way. Today we're going to meet a woman whose own bitter experiences prompted her to create a new approach to accelerating the divorce process. Karen Stewart is our guest today on Family Matters.
Brought to you by AdviceScene.com. Free legal answers from verified lawyers.
Is it possible to accelerate the divorce process while protecting children, preserving assets, and minimizing emotional fallout? Our guest thinks so. Karen Stewart is founder and CEO of Fairway Divorce Solutions, and she says divorce with dignity is possible. Karen, welcome to Family Matters. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I am very interested in exploring ways that people can resolve parental conflict and dissolve a marriage that are non-adversarial. And you have you've written a book. Mm-hmm. It's called Clean Break, and you advocate for a completely revolutionary way of resolving family conflict. And that's what we're going to explore today. You refer to it as the independently negotiated resolution process. What is that?
Well, I think it starts by coming with what was wrong with our, what were some of the flaws in the processes that we had before. And the reality is we didn't have a lot of process. So independently negotiated resolution is about taking two people through a process, really important, independently of each other, equally important, to bring resolution in all the different matters. And it's based on the premise that when people are going through conflict, they don't resolve issues in the same way. You may have a very articulate, analytical, and you may have a very creative. They're not likely going to be great sitting across the table from each other, negotiating or mediating. So this allows them to go through a process where they can come to the same outcome, but entirely different ways.
So they each meet with the same person, but not together. They never sit down together with the same person. And so this is very different from mediation, isn't it?
It is, and I practiced mediation. I did a lot of mediation, and I sat in on mediations, and I sat in different collaborative law environments, and I kept thinking the problem here is that we don't have a process and methodology that we can apply to different types of personality types. So it's important that as people are making these incredibly important decisions, that they can do it in a way that they can make educated, sound, and grounded decisions. And sometimes when you put people in a room together, there's a whole lot of other things playing out that you just can't quantify, and you often miss.
So the person that is responsible for the negotiation would meet with each person separately. What kind of qualifications would this negotiator have?
Well, fundamentally, we would fall within the mediation world, right? It falls with under the umbrella of mediation. So you're looking for somebody who's got strong negotiation skills. I believe fundamentally the two issues in divorce are money and kids. We need to deal with money. So I look and like people who are highly educated in the financial area, who are CAs, who are MBAs with a strong financial background, who perhaps are lawyers with a strong financial background. So I really like the idea of having well-educated, informed financial advisors.
Do you ever hear concerns that one party wonders what the negotiator is telling the other? And is the negotiator maybe playing both sides against the middle? Because it's like caucusing, isn't it, in a way?
It is like caucusing. The difference with caucusing and this is that the negotiator is working again, following a methodology that starts here, ends here, and follows a very strategic line. So the couple knows where they've come from and where they're going. So if we're not dealing with, let's say, kids yet, we're dealing with the financials, or we may be dealing with the value of the assets. It's all very methodical. And yes, emotion plays a role, but the idea is, and the hope is that the negotiator can call the client on that emotion. So perhaps, is that an emotional decision, or was that a grounded financial decision? Is this a decision that's going to give you and empower you in your future financially or not? That's really the role of the negotiator.
But is there a confidentiality concern? I mean, if you were my negotiator and I meet with you and I confide in you and tell you what I want and why I want it, and then my ex-wife meets with you and I'm not there, and tells you what she wants, are you allowed to say to her, well, look, he just told me this, so just so that you know, your position would be better if you do this?
Well, no, but that's coming a bit from the perspective of position bargaining, right? Our objective is to get clients through in a resolution that they both agree with. And in order to do that, you have to say things. You have to move them through and empower them to make decisions. Confidentiality is, it's on the table. There's really nothing confidential. Clearly, you're not going to go back to one party and say the other one just said you've been lazy for the last 20 years, because that wouldn't be conducive to bringing resolution. So you want the negotiators to be very, very prepared and informed about how to move clients through in the negotiations to bring the resolution that they ultimately is in the best outcome for them and their kids and their assets. You see, assets drive a lot of the decisions. There's very few financial situations are that complicated that you can't, in fact, consider them almost separate from the couple.
Do they have lawyers while they're going through this process?
It depends. Independent legal advice is crucial. We advocate for it. We want our clients to get independent legal advice. We like people to be educated. Here's a big difference, though. Getting independent legal advice is not necessarily the same as understanding the big picture. I'll say to people, if you go to get independent legal advice, I want you to ask the question, okay, what if my spouse was sitting here and told you the exact same story, perhaps with a different twist? What would be the advice you'd give them? I like to start with people understanding the context of the law and perhaps some of the issues, and then get independent legal advice so that they can feel grounded in their decision making.
And how do you know, as the negotiator, that you're getting complete financial disclosure? Because you can't really deal with assets unless you know what each person has.
You know, that's a great question, and I get asked that all the time. And the answer is you never know. But you know what? In my case, I went through discoveries, and I was just kind of giggling at the lack of questions that the lawyer was asking me that didn't reveal perhaps some of the stuff that I was like, why wouldn't you ask this question? So I don't know that our system is perfect at getting disclosure. We're not perfect at getting it at all, and the premise is they have to voluntarily give it. That's the premise of independently negotiated resolution. It's still a mediation model.
Well, that's a good start. I've got a lot more to ask you. When we come back, I'm going to be asking about the painted picture. Stay with us. Welcome back to Family Matters. We're here with Karen Stewart, who is advocating for a new and revolutionary way of resolving parental disputes and dividing matrimonial property. What is the wish list that you refer to?
I call it the painted picture. And this
The
is
painted picture.
Exactly. And this is actually,
I call it a wish list.
Yeah, this is actually a concept taken from business, which is, start with the end game in mind. And in dealing with people in divorce, I'm a real advocate of not playing the role of a victim, because in that role, you're creating chaos and you're totally disempowered, not just yourself, but your children. And so I like to get people in a position where they start to pull together, what does the future look like? Say, take a canvas, and what does it look like? Where would you like to be 2 years? Where would you like to be 5 years from now? And then that gives you a place to focus rather than on poor me, I'm not going to be able to put food on the table and whatever's I'm going to have to deal with in the next few months or years to get things solved.
So it's goal-oriented, it gives people hope, and it focuses on the future, not the pain of the present. I think everybody should do that. I think maybe in court I should be asking people, what do you want your life to look like in 5 years? I think that's a very helpful tip. Now, one of the biggest elements of your philosophy is that before parties agree on who gets what, you must agree on what they are worth, the value. Why do you say that?
Well, a bit of this I took from, again, my background in finance, but also my own case. And I noticed in my own case that it didn't seem to matter what I put forth. The other party wanted it. My ex wanted it.
And I guess we should just mention to our viewing audience that you went through a long, hard, protracted divorce.
Exactly. And
so when you talk about your own case, that's what you're saying.
Exactly. When I went through it before I ever started Fairway Divorce Solutions. So one of the issues in my scenario was that, yeah, the other person always seemed to want it. It didn't matter how I framed it. And then I realized, wait a minute here. Every single asset has a value. There are actually two values to it. One is the actual value, the dollar value, and the other one is the emotional value. It's the emotional value that causes the problems in our cases and with people in divorce. So you've got to remove the emotion from the value. How do you do that? You can do it through valuations. You can do it through, you know, a little bit of mind shifting, helping people to just realize that it's the four walls, it's inside the four walls that matter, not necessarily the four walls that matter.
But they must need counseling for that. I mean, I have to tell you, you know what I see in court very often? Somebody will get up and say, I don't know what I want, but I want it now. The other party will get up and say, I don't know what she wants either, or what he wants either, but I don't want them to have it. Isn't that pretty much what happened?
That's exactly it. And that's why you have to slow people down and get them on a path that's methodical and that's logic and adheres to their ability to see a positive outcome for themselves.
And you don't agree with position bargaining, which really means the value that I assign to an asset kind of depends on whether I want to have it or I want you to have it.
Well, that's what happens, and it's a disaster because, again, position bargaining is usually comes from a place of fear, and fear is totally disempowering. So you've got to say, what is the value of the asset? And we're not moving until we agree on the value of the asset. There is always a value. There's always a value. And people say...
And you get valuators to, so you have to, I guess, retain, depending if it's a business or an asset or something tangible, you've got to get help. Well, and people have to pay. Do they agree on who the evaluator is so that they get one person?
Absolutely.
And do they agree on that they're going to be bound by that person's evaluation?
Yes, they do. But what's really interesting is when you're dealing with couples, often they will come to their own decision on a value of an asset. If you can get people to understand, they can go do their little research, and then in many cases they can come to it. Let's say it's for a house or a car. If it's a business, it's an entirely different scenario, and they obviously need independent valuations.
But let's say it's a family cottage.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, I would think this is the hardest part of the process that you are promoting.
So you know what? First of all, you got to come up with a value. So how do you do that? And it's hard to separate the emotions when you're coming up with a value because they're assuming it's not going to be sold. Right? And so if we're going to sell it today, it might be worth less than we think it's worth. However, there is a value. At one point, one of the parties will say, I will sell it for that price. And the other party may say, I'll take it for that price. Or that's actually not a fair price. And you start those kind of negotiations going back and forth, and you can actually get to a price that they both agree on.
And how long might that take?
It's not, believe it or not, and these are some of the surprises I found when I started to you know, I was in the sandbox for 2 or 3 years trying to figure this model out, and these are some of the surprises that in fact people, once they start to step away from their emotions, it doesn't take that long. I mean, certainly some people are longer than others, but it's not really rocket science.
No, and I would think it's also rarely, is it a legal issue? You know, in the traditional model, lawyers are involved, they do retain valuators, but often each party gets their own expert, and the experts can have very different evaluations, and then you're into which expert evaluation is better, or should we get a third? You probably lived through that, given the conflict divorce you had. Whereas, you know, it's not really a legal issue, it's a valuation, it's a financial issue.
Exactly, exactly. And it needs to have some financial common sense applied to it, because even when you get valuations, you could find out that in fact the valuation is not even accurate. The best people to come up with it for a cottage is the couple themselves with information.
And you say that once you have agreed on the value of the property, then you deal with who gets what, and only then can you deal with the parenting issues, the children.
Exactly.
Why?
And that's so counterintuitive, because what's the most important thing to us? It's our children.
Yes.
Yet the problem is, when we're dealing with our children, there's so many other issues that are playing havoc with our ability to look at what's good for the children and for us as co-parents. We've got fear around money. We have fear around where we're going to live. We're just burdened with fear. We're not in a position to come up with a plan that is so empowering for a family. You need to remove that obstacle. You need to remove the financial element, pretty much nail it down, and then it's a miracle. I believe it's a miracle.
You mean to say that once people have figured out how the money's going to get divided, who gets what, the conflict over the parenting can dissolve?
I have had the most highly conflicted couples around parenting, and almost all the time I can resolve the entire parenting issues in 2 to 3 to 4 hours.
You know, it's actually amazing to hear that this can be done, because the anger and the resentment that I see in court is usually not about the property. It's about betrayal, it's about infidelity, it's about incompatibility. And I've always assumed that that anger is what's fueling the parental conflict.
It's mostly about fear, right? Fear is the fundamental issue, and if we can remove fear, which is often around money, then we're in a position to actually look at a parenting plan that's going to work for everybody.
Well, we've dealt with the process, we've dealt with the property. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about the children. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our remaining moments of Family Matters with our guest, Karen Stewart. We were saying before the break that decisions about parenting do not get made under your process until the property and financial issues are dealt with. What do you do in the meantime? What if there's an argument now about who's going to pick up the children from school today?
That's a really good point. I think in any kind of situation when you're coming up with decisions that are going to affect your long term, which would be what, 2, 5, 10, 20 years, there needs to be a short-term plan. And so if you do a proper short-term plan with a couple, then what happens is you can bring the emotions down in the short term, and you can bridge the gap so that they can, again, lower the temperature so you can start to focus on the long-term decisions. Short-term decisions and long-term decisions are not necessarily the same.
That's right, that's right. And you are a big fan of detailed parenting plans. You want it all spelled out.
I absolutely do. Even with couples who get along famously and who have a great relationship, what do they say? Fail to plan, plan to fail. It's like the painted picture, right? Once you put something in writing and you create a picture around it, you tend just by nature to follow it. I always say to people, you can stick it in a drawer, I don't care. But at some point in time, if there's a question around a new relationship, education, skydiving, I don't care what it is, you've sat down in an environment where you've thought this out in advance.
Do you even deal with things like who can take the child out trick-or-treating? Because I got to tell you, Halloween is not a fun time at my courthouse.
Absolutely.
People get very worked up about that.
I know.
Do you know how unpleasant it is to decide whose 3-year-old child gets to go out looking like Lady Gaga?
I can't imagine, but what I can tell you...
And I want them to look like Cher, you know.
Exactly.
But is it that detailed?
It needs to be. It needs to be who's picking them up, what time, from what house. Is there suitcases going back and forth or not? Are there toothbrushes in this house and that house? It's like coming up with a good business plan. If you have it mapped out, guess what? You can tweak along the way, but you're not going to have major implosion or explosion.
And I think this process is very interesting. I really believe people need to know all the options out there. But does it work for everyone? How do you know if this... You say it doesn't. So
no.
Who is suited to this process and who isn't?
Well, I believe that the majority of people are suited to processes that don't involve fighting in courts and being adversarial. I believe the large majority is suited to that. I believe there's a lack of understanding in how that can unfold, and there's a lack of education. So people often don't feel the confidence in the different kinds of alternatives. The smart thing to do is do your research. Get online. talk to people,
But
look
let me
at the
give
options.
you, I get all that, but let me tell you what my day is like in court. We deal with a lot of people with mental health problems. Are they suited?
No.
And I mean, one party could have a mental health problem.
No.
Okay. What about a person with a substance abuse problem?
There is a huge necessity for people who are going to litigate and people who need the court systems to help them out. Those would be anytime there's abuse. Those would be,
domestic violence.
Domestic violence. Personality disorders are very, very difficult to move through this, and we need our system for that. The laws are great. We need our system to help
because
them
they
through
need
that.
a decision. If there's violence, you could need a restraining order. I don't think that you're really out to put the courts out of business, because you seem to acknowledge that there is a segment of the population that need the protection of the courts. They need a court order.
Absolutely. 50% of our couples and families are splitting up. That 50% do not need to fight it out. That 50% need a healthy way to make grounded decisions to move them through so that they can move on with their life and not create a negative legacy for their children and generations to come.
Now, I have to ask you this question because I can't imagine anyone watching this show not wondering by now, what would something like this cost?
Well,
we know that lawyers charge between $200 and $500 an hour.
An hour.
That's fair, right?
Exactly.
What does this kind of process cost?
Well, independently negotiated resolution is designed to get everybody on the same side of the table. So if you have everybody on the same side of the table, you can pretty quickly up front ascertain how complex the financial issues and how reasonably complex the emotional issues are, and that can be used to structure a flat fee. I'm a big advocate of flat fee because I believe it does put everybody on the same side of the page.
A flat fee?
Exactly. Now, it
but that's
will
not
change.
counting what you're going to pay a valuator. And
right.
I think we have to make very clear, no one should sign anything without independent legal advice. Absolutely. You're going to have to go to a lawyer. So those fees would be on top.
Exactly.
But the flat fee, can you give me a rough idea? For example, in your marriage, there was a family business, not a large one. There were 2 children. What would a couple who have a small business, a couple of, a home, maybe a cottage, some savings, and 2 children, what should that cost?
I think that if I was charging me, in my case, it would be probably $10,000 each compared to the $500,000 that I spent, and probably the $500,000 he spent.
Well, people can do the math for themselves. I am interested in exploring all kinds of options. I'm not in a position to say which is best. I can only tell you the system I work in certainly has its pros and its cons. I hope people are educated about what's out there before they make these crucial decisions. Thank you so much for being on our show. From all of us here at Family Matters, thanks for watching. See you next time.